December 21st, 1944. Outside St. Vith, Belgium. The world was white, silent and merciless. Snow drifted over the wreckage of what had once been a town. Smoke rose from shattered chimneys, curling through the wind like ghosts trying to find their way home. Somewhere among the ruins, Private First Class Thomas Hale wiped the frost from his rifle and realized his scope was gone. The glass had shattered an hour earlier. A shell had landed too close, and when he hit the ground, the sight cracked clean across. He'd spent 5 months learning to breathe through the scope, to make the world shrink to a single moving dot. Now all he saw through the jagged lens was blur and light. He took it off carefully, setting it in the snow beside him. It looked like an eye that had gone blind. "Can you fix it?" Sergeant Donovan had asked. "Not out here," Hale had answered. The sergeant had frowned. "Then you're just a guy with a fancy stick, Hale. Stay low and don't waste ammo." But Hale wasn't built for staying low. He'd grown up in the hills of West Virginia, hunting before he could read. His father taught him the rhythm of wind across open fields, the way leaves moved seconds before a gust, the way birds lifted when something shifted in the air. He'd learned distance not by numbers, but by sound. How long it took a crow's call to return, how echoes bent around stone. The army had given him a scope, but the truth was he'd never really needed it. Now, kneeling in snow up to his thighs, rifle pressed against his cheek, he realized he was about to prove that. He lifted the weapon, sighting along the naked iron line. No magnification, no crosshair, just instinct and air. Through the drifting snow, faint shapes moved among the trees' German infantry, advancing cautiously, using the wrecks as cover. There were 5 of them, maybe more. Hale exhaled, long and steady. He could feel the air on his face north wind, sharp and constant, cross left. He adjusted by 1/2 an inch. When he squeezed the trigger, the sound felt smaller than usual, muted by the snow. The figure in the trees folded instantly. The others froze. They didn't know where it had come from. Hale shifted positions, sliding behind a broken wall. He waited for them to move again. They did. The second shot took another man before he reached cover. Donovan looked over, wide-eyed. "You can't even see them, Hale." "Don't have to," Hale said quietly. The soldier who aimed without seeing. That's what they'd call him later. But right then he wasn't thinking about records or headlines. He was thinking about how far snow could bend sound. For 3 hours the Germans tried to flank them. Every movement, every shadow. They never reached the line. Hale fired 13 rounds, 12 hit. The 13th buried itself in a log an inch from a helmet, close enough to make the survivor drop his rifle and crawl away. When it was over, the woods fell silent again. Donovan approached, still shaking his head. "You're telling me you're judging distance by, what, feel?" Hale didn't look up. He was cleaning the rifle, slow and deliberate. "By memory." He pointed toward the wreckage ahead. "You see that steeple? Used to be the church in town. I watched it for 2 days through the scope before it broke. I know the space between here and there, how the wind carries, how the echo hits. You don't forget something like that." Donovan crouched beside him. "Hell of a memory, kid." Hale shrugged. "It's not memory, it's rhythm. The air's got rhythm if you listen long enough." That night they huddled in a cellar lit only by the orange pulse of a dying fire. The air stank of cordite and smoke. Outside, artillery rumbled in the distance like an approaching storm. Hale sat apart, polishing his rifle, running a cloth along the cold barrel. Someone asked quietly, "You going to get another scope?" He didn't answer right away. He thought about it. The scope had been safety precision, comfort, distance from what you killed. But the iron sights, the wind, the raw guesswork, it made him feel something else. Closer, sharper, honest. Finally he said, "Don't need one." "Then how do you know you'll hit?" He looked up, eyes pale in the flickering light. "Because the bullet still listens, even when you can't see where it's going." No one said anything after that. Outside the snow fell thicker. Tomorrow they'd move again, south toward Bastogne, where the front was breaking apart. But for tonight, in the silence between shelling and sleep, Hale finally understood that the best weapon wasn't glass or steel. It was trust in muscle, in instinct, in memory, and in the tiny invisible rhythm of wind that never stopped moving, even when the world did. By sunrise, the snow had stopped falling, but the cold had only gotten meaner. The world outside St. Vith didn't look like a battlefield anymore. It looked like bone. Trees stripped bare, houses snapped open and left bleeding heat into the air. The sky was a flat sheet of iron, the kind of morning that didn't feel alive. The squad moved through the ruins in a low, staggered line, weaving between burned-out trucks and the black ribs of collapsed barns. The Battle of the Bulge was in full swing now, and everyone knew it. The Germans weren't creeping anymore. They were hunting. The order was simple. Hold as long as you can, then hold longer. Men were disappearing in pockets all over the Ardennes, swallowed by armour and cold. Radio contact cut in and out. Nobody knew who was still alive. Nobody knew what ground still belonged to who. Sergeant Donovan walked point. Hale followed close, cradling his rifle like something that bled when you mistreated it. The scope, broken and useless, rode in his pocket now, a dead thing he couldn't quite force himself to throw away. "You understand what you did last night wasn't normal?" Donovan said without turning. Hale didn't answer. "I mean it," Donovan continued. 12 out of 13 in those conditions without glass? You shouldn't be able to do that. I've seen men with perfect scopes miss at half that distance in daylight. You hit through smoke and snow. Hale kept walking. "I'd rather you didn't tell people that." "Why?" "Because if you tell people I can do it, they'll ask me to do it again." Donovan almost laughed, but it wasn't really funny. The truth sat there, heavy between them. Hale didn't want to be special. Special people got used up. They reached an intersection that used to be a main road and was now just churned ice packed down by tank treads. Donovan held up a fist, and the squad froze. Hale scanned, slow, controlled, breathing through his mouth so the steam wouldn't give him away. Wind slight, drifting right to left. Temperature sharp enough to sting the inside of his nose. Visibility maybe 50 yards through the broken smoke hanging over the fields like torn fabric. And then he heard it. Not a voice, not boots. Something softer. Cloth dragging against wood, metal brushing stone. He lifted his rifle and pressed the iron notch against the horizon. "Someone's out there," he whispered. "Where?" Private Lucero squinted into the grey. "I don't see anything." "Don't look for movement," Hale said. "Listen for interruption." Lucero frowned. "For what?" Hale didn't take his eyes off the sight line. Wind moves clean over flat ground. If you hear it skip, something's in the way. A second later, the skip came again. A tiny hitch in the way the air travelled along the ruined fence line ahead. The kind of thing no one should have noticed. Hale adjusted left by a hair, found empty space, and fired once. The shape that dropped out of the haze wasn't American. "Contact," Hale said, calm as if he were reading a grocery list. "More than one. 2 o'clock, advancing slow." Before the others could react, machine gun tracers ripped past them, stitching the air with angry white lines. The squad dove behind the burned-out husk of a truck. Splinters and glass showered down. Hale slid on his knees into cover, heartbeat steady, mind already sorting angles. Donovan cursed under his breath. "We're pinned, we can't see a damn thing." "They can't either," Hale said. "They're spraying to keep us still." Lucero's breath was shaking. "So what do we do?" Hale leaned out just enough to see the way muzzle flashes flared and vanished in the fog. He watched the pattern. Short bursts, pause, short bursts, pause. "They've got an MG set low and 2 rifles leapfropping," he said quietly. "Rifles are close. MG is farther back." Donovan glanced at him. "You're guessing that?" "I'm listening to it." Hale shifted positions and braced the rifle across the truck frame. He couldn't see the gunner. He didn't need to. He knew where a man would be if he wanted to own that lane of fire. He pictured the way he himself would set up, prone behind the overturned sled of a wagon, barrel propped just high enough over the axle, left elbow in the frozen mud. He aimed at that idea and fired. The MG stopped mid-burst like someone had cut its throat. For a heartbeat the world went quiet. Then shouting in German, Donovan blinked. "What in God's name are you?" Hale didn't answer. He was already moving, already rolling to a new position because he knew what came next. Panic fire, rage fire, blind fire. Men who'd just watched their coverman die always shot angry, and angry fire was sloppy. Bullets tore through the truck where Hale had been seconds earlier. Splinters peppered Donovan's sleeve. Lucero swore and ducked lower. Hale lay flat in the slush, cheek in the ice, barrel levelled, chest barely moving. Breathing was everything. If he breathed wrong, the rifle twitched. If the rifle twitched, the shot drifted. He exhaled slow and even, letting the cold numb everything but his focus. He picked one voice in the shouting, the loudest, the one giving orders, the one trying to regain control. He aimed at that voice and squeezed. The shouting cut off. After that it ended fast. The survivors broke. He could hear it in their footsteps, first hard, aggressive, then suddenly lighter, faster, turning away. Retreat. The squad stayed low until the last echo faded. Only then did Donovan lift his head. The street was empty except for still shapes in the grey. "You just cleared a street you couldn't see," Donovan said quietly. "You realise that, right?" Hale sat up slowly, rubbing the feeling back into his hands. "They were close," he said. "Closer than they sounded." Donovan stared. "How do you know how close they sounded?" Hale shrugged. "Sound sits different in cold air, carries longer, makes things feel farther than they are. You have to subtract for that." Lucero blinked like Hale had started speaking a new language. "Subtract," he repeated, "from sound." Hale didn't smile. "Don't worry about the math. Just stay behind cover when I tell you." They moved again. Word travelled faster than ice. By midday, 2 more squads had quietly angled themselves near Hale's group. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone knew why. It wasn't luck anymore. It wasn't a nice shot. It was repeatable. That was terrifying. Men in war learn quickly who is worth standing near. Hale pretended not to notice the way they kept glancing at him like he was something they hadn't decided was holy or cursed. He didn't want that. He didn't want looks. He didn't want whispers. He didn't want to be the guy. He just wanted to keep them breathing. But command noticed too. Near a collapsed barn that afternoon, with the sky turning the colour of old lead, a lieutenant he'd never met approached him. Clean jacket, fresh boots. Clipboard he shouldn't have had in a place like this. The kind of officer who shouldn't have been this close to the line unless something had gone very wrong somewhere else. "Name," the lieutenant said. "Hale," Hale answered. "You're the one without the scope." Hale said nothing. The lieutenant nodded once, like that confirmed paperwork in his head. "Congratulations, Hale," he said. "You're now Battalion Overwatch. You're going to sit in a hole and keep people alive." He pointed toward the tree line. "And you're going to do it again tonight." Hale stared at him. "Sir, my sight is gone." "So I've been told," the lieutenant said. "That's why I'm here." Hale felt it then. The shift. The same thing Eddie Voss had felt in that foxhole when the truth turned into weight. The moment where talent stops being yours and becomes property. He wasn't just protecting the men next to him anymore. He was now responsible for the lives of people he hadn't even met yet. And if he failed, it wouldn't just be a bad shot. It would be bodies. He looked down at his rifle. Cold metal, scarred finish, no glass, just iron, his hands, and the air. "Sir," he said quietly, "what exactly am I watching?" The lieutenant didn't hesitate. "Panzers," he said, and just like that the math changed. Night came early in the Ardennes. By 4, the world had already turned black. The wind moved through the trees like breath through broken glass, whistling in every crack of ruin. Hale lay on his stomach in a shallow depression halfway up the ridge, his rifle resting on a sandbag, his cheek pressed to frozen metal. No scope, no night sight, just the faint outline of the valley below, a white blur under a darker sky. The tanks came just after dusk. He heard them before he saw them. A low, grinding hum, steady as the heartbeat of something too big to be alive. Panzers. The ground trembled with every rotation of their treads. He could feel it in his ribs. Each vibration carried up through the dirt, through his chest, into his jaw. It felt like time itself had weight. Behind him, the lieutenant whispered, "They'll move along the road. We'll hit them when they cross the bend." Hale didn't answer. He was already measuring. Sound distance, wind drift, metal on frost. He listened to how the air moved around their bulk, the difference between steel in motion and air in panic. It was music to him, if music could be terrible. The first tank appeared in the half-light, a grey mass creeping along the road, turret turning slow, methodical. Infantry followed behind, silhouettes hunched low against the cold. Hale tracked them not with sight, but with rhythm. He counted the beats between their movements. He could tell who led, who lagged. He could tell which man was afraid. He adjusted the rifle slightly. No magnification, just trust. He aimed for the space between the commander's open hatch and the man's headlamp glare, where light met shadow, where his instinct said now. The trigger broke clean. The flash lit his face for half a second, and then the world went dark again. A heartbeat later, the commander collapsed. The tank lurched to a halt. Chaos rippled through the column. Shouts, clattering metal, the kind of confusion that spread faster than fear. Hale's spotter, a boy barely out of training, whispered, "You hit him." "I know," Hale said softly. He cycled the bolt, found another target, fired again. This one he missed. The bullet sparked against armour. Didn't matter. The second shot was never meant to kill. It was meant to remind them someone was watching. The Germans scattered for cover. Some dove into ditches, some froze behind their machines. Hale stayed still. Patience was power. The world narrowed to breath and heartbeat and waiting. One by one they tried to locate him. Tracers cut through the dark like angry comets. He moved between shots, sliding left, counting seconds between volleys. Each time they fired, they revealed their fear. Each time he fired, he turned that fear into hesitation. By the time the moon climbed high, 3 tanks sat abandoned in the road, their crews fled or dead. The rest turned back. The valley fell silent again except for the crackle of engines cooling in the snow. The lieutenant crouched beside him. "You just stopped armor with a rifle," he whispered. "No," Hale said. "I stopped them with doubt." He looked down at his rifle, the iron sights slick with frost. Every shot had been pure guesswork, but guesswork informed by hours of listening, by the memory of wind and distance. There was no formula, no angle, just feeling. The lieutenant nodded slowly. "You're not a sniper anymore, Hale. You're something else." Hale didn't reply. He just stared at the valley. Somewhere below, men were retreating into darkness, wondering what kind of ghost could aim through blindness. When dawn came, the snow fell again, soft, unhurried, erasing footprints, tire tracks, the memory of the night before. The world looked untouched, like nothing had ever happened here at all. But Hale knew better. He could still feel the rhythm under his skin, the breath of wind, the pulse of machines, the invisible geometry of life and death. He closed his eyes and let the cold settle into him, knowing it would never leave. He wasn't aiming anymore. He was listening. And as long as the war went on, that would be enough. The snow had a way of making sound lie. It stretched every echo, folded every crack of movement into something slower, deeper, older. After the ambush at the ridge, Hale stopped trusting what his ears told him. He trusted what came after, the silence between. That silence had weight. It had direction. 2 days later, the squad was ordered to hold a farmhouse outside Ligneville, a skeleton of stone and splintered beams, its roof half gone, its walls blackened from artillery. The kind of place soldiers only defended because it already looked dead. Hale took position in the attic, lying prone between 2 broken rafters. The others fortified the lower floors, stacking crates and sandbags, checking ammunition that was running dangerously thin. The farmhouse stood on a gentle rise overlooking a valley road. Command expected a German patrol to pass through before dusk. Hale expected something worse. He had a feeling. It wasn't logic or reconnaissance, it was rhythm again. The same rhythm he'd felt before every storm, before every ambush that hadn't yet happened. The air that morning carried pressure, like the world was holding its breath. Donovan came up the stairs quietly, boots muffled by dust. "You good up here?" Hale nodded. "Wind's wrong." Donovan frowned. "Wrong how?" "It's shifting in circles. Means the air's trapped. Snow's coming again, maybe fog too. They'll use it." "You saying they'll attack in a blizzard?" "I'm saying they'll move when we can't see them." Donovan grunted. "Guess that's when you shine." Hale didn't smile. He watched the tree line through the open beam, every gust bending branches in slow motion. He could almost hear them creak before they moved, like they were whispering warnings. He laid the rifle flat, adjusted the iron sights, and waited. By noon, the wind died completely. The world went still enough to hear snowflakes land. That was how he knew they were coming. The first sound was soft, the crunch of boots somewhere beyond sight. Then faint voices carried through the cold. German, calm, confident. They thought the house was empty. Hale exhaled. "They're here." Donovan's voice came over the floorboards below. "Positions, boys. Wait for the first shot." But the first shot didn't come from downstairs. It came from Hale. He didn't aim for a body, he aimed for a sound. The whisper of a boot brushing frozen grass. He fired once. The echo cracked the stillness in half. The return fire came instantly, wild and angry, tearing holes through the roof. He rolled aside, pressed into shadow. Another movement, this one lower, closer. Two of them trying to flank the farmhouse wall. He waited for the wind to return. It came like a breath through the cracks, a soft gust from east to west. Perfect. It would carry the sound of his rifle away from where it came. He fired twice more, and both figures dropped before they reached the wall. From below, Donovan shouted, "How the hell are you seeing them?" "I'm not," Hale called back. Then the artillery started. Shells screamed overhead, bursting along the slope. The shockwaves slammed through the attic, rattling loose boards and choking the air with plaster dust. Hale coughed, eyes watering, but kept his rifle steady. Between each explosion he listened. Artillery had its own cadence, its own pulse. And within that chaos he could hear the footsteps again, German infantry advancing through their own barrage, using the noise to cover their charge. "They're pushing under the blasts," Hale shouted. "How can you tell?" "Because the ground shakes wrong." He fired again, then again, counting heartbeats, matching shots to the breaks in the bombardment. The attic filled with smoke and dust until he could barely see. The roof creaked. A beam split behind him, showering splinters. Still he didn't stop. Below, the men shouted orders. Grenades went off near the doorway. Hale kept firing by instinct. Sound, wind, timing, nothing else. His world had shrunk to vibration and recoil. Then all at once it stopped. The blasts faded. The footsteps ceased. Only the faint hiss of settling snow remained. He didn't realize he'd been holding his breath until his lungs burned. "Clear," Donovan called. "For now," Hale answered. They held the farmhouse for another 3 hours before reinforcements arrived. When the relief unit found them, half the structure was gone. The attic roof had collapsed inward. Hale sat against a broken beam, rifle across his lap, eyes half closed, every nerve still tuned to the air. The lieutenant who'd promoted him 2 days earlier arrived with the new column. He climbed the stairs, stepping carefully over the wreckage. "You held this?" Hale nodded. "With no sight, no visibility, no support?" "Wasn't the first time," Hale said. The officer studied him for a moment, then looked at the rifle. "How many?" Hale shrugged. "Enough?" The lieutenant almost smiled. "You know they're calling you the ghost at St. Vith? Word's spreading. Men say you can hear bullets before they land." Hale looked past him, through the shattered wall where sunlight now cut through the drifting snow. "That's not true." "What is true, then?" Hale thought for a moment. "I can hear the pause before they're fired. That's when you decide who walks away." The lieutenant didn't reply. He didn't have to. He understood that kind of loneliness. Hale stayed in that farmhouse until night returned, long after the shooting stopped. The wind came back, circling the ruins in a low, mournful hum. He listened to it for hours, memorizing its rhythm again, because he knew sooner or later someone else would need saving, and the only map he'd have would be the air itself. That night, when the others finally slept, Hale whispered into the dark, still listening. The wind answered softly, as if to say it was too. When dawn broke the next morning, it wasn't light that woke Hale. It was vibration. A faint, steady hum beneath the floorboards, so deep it felt like breathing. He knew that rhythm. Tanks. Not near yet, but close enough to make the windows shiver in their frames. He opened his eyes, exhaled, and felt the cold slip into his chest like smoke. The farmhouse was quiet. Donovan and the others were still asleep, wrapped in blankets that smelled of cordite and ash. Hale didn't wake them. Not yet. He crawled to the window and looked out through the missing wall. The valley below was silver with frost, glittering under the pale sky. Mist hovered low, swallowing the trees. Somewhere beyond that mist, engines growled in unison. He could almost trace their formation by sound alone. 3 lead tanks, one slightly delayed, others spreading wide. A textbook pincer. He whispered to himself, "They're learning." Donovan stirred behind him. "You talking to ghosts again?" "Maybe." Hale turned his head slightly. "They're coming from 2 sides this time. They want the hill." Donovan rubbed his face, squinting toward the valley. "You can tell that from here?" "I can feel it," Hale said quietly. "The right flank's moving faster. Lighter treads. They're sending infantry with them. They think we'll shoot at the armour first." Donovan stared. "You can't know that." Hale looked at him, calm, almost detached. "I don't have to know it. I just have to hear what they forgot to hide." He reached for his rifle and checked the chamber. No scope, same iron sight polished from constant use. The stock felt like part of him now, scarred wood against calloused hands. By the time the first tank appeared, the mist had thickened again. Its barrel broke the fog like the snout of a whale surfacing from the deep. The sound came a second later, a groaning metal heartbeat that made the ground tremble. The others followed, ghosts in formation. The infantry shadows moved behind, half seen through the haze. Hale steadied his breath. He wasn't hunting men now, he was hunting sound. Every step the tanks took changed the tone of the valley. The air grew heavier, the wind slower, the world denser. He lay flat, cheek against frozen timber, finger poised on the trigger. "Hold fire," Donovan whispered. Hale didn't respond. His mind wasn't here anymore. He was inside the rhythm. Each movement, each echo, a pattern unfolding like the tick of an unseen clock. He realized he could predict when the next tank would turn its turret by the way the metal strained before it moved. He adjusted aim without thinking. The first shot cracked like lightning. It wasn't aimed at armour, he'd aimed higher, where the open hatch caught a glint of dawn. The tank jerked to a stop. A heartbeat later, smoke leaked from the hatch, slow and dark. "Hit!" Donovan shouted, but Hale didn't stop. He shifted 2 degrees left and fired again. Another hit, not lethal, but loud enough to confuse the formation. The Germans halted, shouting orders muffled by fog. Then, as if the valley itself had been waiting, American artillery answered. The ground erupted behind the tanks, dirt and snow lifting in violent plumes. Hale pressed his ear against the wood, counting seconds between blasts. He could tell where each shell landed by the way the floor vibrated. He whispered corrections under his breath, more to the universe than to anyone listening. "Left, 3 yards, up the slope. That's it." Donovan leaned close. "Who are you talking to?" "The wind," Hale said simply. The fog thickened until even the muzzle flashes disappeared. The entire valley was sound and vibration now. Tanks roaring, shells whistling, men shouting, and beneath it all, Hale heard something else. A hollow space in the chaos. A gap. That's where the real danger always hid. He rolled off the beam, dropped to the floor, and shouted down the stairs, "Back door, move now." The men below didn't question it. They grabbed rifles and rushed toward the rear exit. 5 seconds later, the front of the farmhouse exploded. Fire punched through the wall Hale had been lying against. The blast threw him backward, ears ringing, lungs screaming for air. He hit the floor hard and lay there, the world spinning. When the ringing faded, he could hear Donovan's voice faintly through the smoke. You still breathing? Yeah, Hale coughed. Barely. He pushed himself upright. The front half of the farmhouse was gone. Through the hole he could see the road and the tanks burning in the valley below. American shells had found their mark. The German pincer had folded before it began. Donovan limped into view, face streaked with soot. You called that strike? Hale shook his head. No, just listened for it. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the fire spread across the valley. Snow melted into steam, twisting upward like ghosts going home. The air smelled of oil and metal and something else, something final. Donovan finally spoke. What now? Hale looked down at his rifle, then out toward the horizon. Now I wait for the next sound. He stepped outside into the pale morning. The wind picked up again, gentle at first, then stronger, carrying ashes and snow together in one long, endless sigh. For the first time, Hale realized he wasn't afraid of it anymore. The sound that once meant death now meant direction. It was the only compass left in a war that had forgotten which way was home. He stood there, motionless, listening to it move through the broken valley, and smiled faintly, like a man who'd finally learned the language of ghosts. By the third week of the Ardennes siege, Hale had stopped marking days. The war had no calendar anymore, only the rhythm of shellfire and silence. The snow never melted. It only shifted from white to grey, from powder to crust. His unit had been reassigned north of St. Vith, tasked with holding a narrow bridge that barely deserved the name. 2 logs, some wire, and a prayer, but command said it was strategically vital. Hale had stopped laughing at those words. The bridge crossed a shallow ravine. On maps it looked insignificant, but every road in that forest led somewhere deadly. If the Germans got armour across, they'd cut off the entire flank. The Americans had almost nothing left. 1 machine gun, a mortar with 3 shells and hail. He sat in a ditch 20 yards uphill, his rifle balanced across his knees. The barrel was dull from cold, the bolt stiff. He didn't clean it as much now. Oil froze too fast. He'd learned to trust friction. The others built makeshift barricades, muttering about reinforcements that would never come. Donovan crouched beside him, chewing on frozen bread. You think they'll hit us here? Hale didn't look away from the trees. They already have. Donovan frowned. You see something? I hear it. Hale pointed slightly left. Engine idle. 200 metres, maybe less. One's heavier than the rest. That's the lead tank. The others are spacing behind it. Donovan stared at the tree line, seeing nothing. You could make a man paranoid, you know that? Hale didn't answer. The air was telling him more than sight ever could. The wind came from the north, slow, rolling, heavy with snow. It carried sound unevenly, breaking it into whispers. But beneath those whispers was rhythm, the faint mechanical growl of armour moving in patterns too deliberate to be coincidence. He adjusted his rifle, sighting down the bare iron notch. No magnification, no glint, just instinct. The first panzer emerged minutes later, black steel cutting through white mist like ink spilled on paper. It halted halfway across the field. Hale could see the commander through the hatch, scanning with binoculars. The man's face was distant, ghost-like. Donovan whispered, You can't hit that. Hale's breath steamed in the cold. You're right, the wind can. He exhaled slowly, aligning the sight not on the man, but on the space the bullet would occupy 2 seconds from now. He felt the gust shift left, adjusted half an inch, fired. The crack echoed down the valley. A second later, the commander folded silently out of the hatch. The crew panicked. The tank lurched backward, almost colliding with the one behind it. Shouts erupted in German. Hale reloaded without looking. Another shot, this one through the vision slit. The tank stopped completely. The Americans below cheered, but Hale stayed still. The sound hadn't ended. It had split. He could hear another rhythm, faster, shallower, boots crunching on hard snow. Infantry. They were using the tanks as distraction. "Donovan," he said quietly, "get the men ready." "How many?" Hale listened. 20. Maybe more. They'll hit the right flank. "How the hell do you know that?" "Because the wind's clean on the left. Nothing moves there." He shifted position, crawling toward a fallen log. The fog thickened again, muting everything except the faint metallic clicks of rifles being readied. Then came the first burst. German submachine guns ripping into the barricade. Wood splintered. Men dove for cover. Hale stayed prone, tracing the source of the fire by echo. He waited for the rhythm to settle. 1, 2, 3 bursts, a pause, then reload. He fired into the pause. A scream answered, then silence. Every few seconds he repeated it, waiting for the void between noise, filling it with precision. Each shot was an interruption, a reminder that silence could kill too. After 15 minutes, the attack broke. The survivors retreated into the trees, dragging the wounded through the snow. The Americans held, barely. When it was over, Donovan sat beside him, trembling from adrenaline. "You don't miss," he said. "I do," Hale replied. "You just don't notice." Donovan laughed once, the sound sharp and exhausted. "How do you do it? Without a scope? Without even seeing them?" Hale stared into the mist. "You stop aiming at men. You start aiming at moments." That night the wind came back stronger than ever, howling through the ravine like an animal. The bridge creaked, cables straining. Hale sat awake long after the others slept, listening. The wind told stories about where the shells had fallen, where the tanks had burned, where footsteps had ended mid-stride. He realized something then. He wasn't fighting the Germans anymore. He was fighting the pattern, the rhythm of war itself, the endless repetition of noise and silence, destruction and calm. And for the first time he wondered if maybe the wind understood that better than any general ever could. He tilted his head back, letting snowflakes sting his skin. The war had taken his sight, his peace, maybe even his sanity. But it had given him this strange communion, an understanding that the world itself could speak if you were quiet enough to listen. When morning came, Donovan found him still awake. "You sleep at all?" Hale shook his head. "Didn't need to." Donovan looked at the rifle, then the horizon. "You think they'll come again?" "They always do," Hale said. "But so does the wind." He stood, slung the rifle over his shoulder, and started toward the bridge. The gust caught his coat, fluttering it like a flag. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, or maybe artillery. It didn't matter anymore. Hale smiled faintly. Let them come. Because even if the world went silent, he knew the wind never would, and as long as it moved, he'd never miss. The war ended not with noise, but with absence. No engines, no orders, no wind cutting through tree lines, just stillness. Hale didn't remember the day the shooting stopped. One morning he woke up, and there simply wasn't any more to fight. The snow was melting then, grey rivers carving paths through the ruined woods. The bridge he'd defended still stood, though half its boards had burned. He crossed it once more, slowly, rifle slung across his shoulder like a relic of another life. He was thinner now, older by years that hadn't passed yet. The world looked unfamiliar without the sound of danger in it. For months his mind kept reaching for rhythms that weren't there. the pulse of tank treads, the echo of artillery, the wind before a strike. But all he heard was quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against your ribs and demanded you remember everything you'd rather forget. When the army sent him home, he barely recognized the country he'd left. Streets were full of light and laughter, people talking about peace like it was a thing you could just turn back on. Hale smiled when he was expected to, but every sudden noise made him flinch. He worked nights, alone, repairing machinery at a rail depot where the only sound was the hum of engines cooling. It suited him. Machines, he'd found, didn't lie. They made the same sounds every time they broke. You could listen, learn, fix them. People were harder. Sometimes when the wind slipped through the depot doors just right, carrying the metallic hiss of rails and the low moan of the city beyond, he'd close his eyes and be back in Belgium again, on the ridge or the farmhouse or that frozen bridge. He'd hear the same patterns repeating: fear, movement, stillness. Then he'd breathe, steady and deep, and the sound would fade. Years passed that way. The war became something told in books and parades, its heroes wrapped in tidy words. Hale never spoke about his part. There was no medal for a man who'd fought blind, who'd killed by sound and silence. He didn't want one anyway. Once a reporter found him, tracked him through veteran records, wanting a story about the sniper with no scope. She asked if it was true, if he'd really hit targets he couldn't see. Hale had smiled faintly. "I didn't hit targets," he said. "I listened for moments." The woman frowned. "Moments?" He nodded. "Every fight has one, a pause, a breath. Most men aim through glass. I aimed through time." She didn't understand, but she wrote the story anyway. It ran in a small magazine, a few pages tucked between ads for cars and cigarettes. Hale never read it. In his later years, he bought a small cabin outside Milwaukee near the lake. The wind there was different, soft, forgiving. He'd sit on the porch in the evenings, listening to the waves tapping against the rocks, and think how strange it was that peace sounded so much like war when you stopped trying to name it. One autumn morning, a storm rolled in from the north. He stood outside as the first gust hit, sharp and cold, carrying rain like whispers. The sound rose and fell in waves, the same cadence he'd once used to survive. But now it didn't warn him, it welcomed him. He closed his eyes and smiled. "Still listening," he murmured. And for a moment he could almost hear the battlefield again, not the horror, but the rhythm, the invisible pattern that had once guided his hands when his eyes had failed him. Only this time it wasn't a weapon, it was peace. When they found him later, sitting quietly with his old rifle resting across his lap, the storm had already passed. The last note of wind still whispered through the trees, soft as breath. His hands were steady, his eyes closed. And in that silence there was no sound of war, only the echo of a man who had once learned to see without seeing, to aim without a scope, and to trust that even when the world went dark, the wind never missed.